More armed police begin patrolling the streets of London after the recent terror attacks in Europe. They're the first of more than 1,500 armed officers who will eventually be deployed across the UK to reassure the public and act as a deterrent.
We've seen people that are determined to attack us, and we've got to deal with that seriously. This is a deadly serious problem.
With the threat level for the UK remaining at severe, we'll ask how much safer the additional armed police will make us. Also tonight. Panic on board the Emirates flight that crash-landed in Dubai. An extraordinary escape for 300 passengers and crew moments before the plane burst into flames. The first interest rate cut for 7 years is widely expected tomorrow amid more signs the UK economy is slowing. The 21-year-old from Swansea who says her father's imprisoned her in Saudi Arabia. The High Court orders him to send her home. And the family who's landed £61 million, all because of a mother's lucky feeling.
In the south, from bad to worse for southern commuters. They could face 2 more strikes as well as a 5-day walkout. And with 3 border force boats monitoring the country's coastline, MPs say the Royal Navy needs to step in.
Good evening. The first of 600 additional armed police officers have begun patrolling the streets of London in response to the recent terror attacks across Europe. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe, said there was no intelligence of an imminent attack, but it would be foolish to ignore what had happened in other countries. In all, more than 1,500 additional police marksmen will eventually be deployed across the UK, though it's claimed it could take up to 2 years to train them fully. Our Home Affairs correspondent June Kelly reports.
This is what the front line would look like in the face of an attack. These Scotland Yard marksmen have been trained to confront armed terrorists. They will keep moving forward even if one of their colleagues has been shot. They'd be kitted up like this only if the capital was under attack. To get to a scene quickly, they'd travel in pairs on these bikes.
We've been looking at the attack methodology of terrorists on mainland Europe, in Paris and Brussels. An essential part of our tactic is to respond as fast as possible. These bikes give us that best opportunity, along with an array of other tactics that we have.
From today, the first of 600 more armed officers will be patrolling London. The Met Police won't say exactly how many. The force put on this display to give an insight into how it's ready to deal with an attack, while stressing there is no change to everyday policing.
This is not giving every police officer in Britain a gun. It's not giving everybody, even in the Met, a gun. This is increasing to some extent. Still less than 10% of our whole workforce will have a firearm.
Around the country, the plan is to put an extra 1,500 officers on firearms duties, but there are questions about the time frame.
When you're recruiting 1,500, it's going to take a lot of time. You've got to find the resources, you've got to find the facilities, and you've got to find the people. I should think it's going to take at least 2 years.
In London, this will become a familiar sight. Vehicle checkpoints with armed officers in support. They'll be set up in different places on different days. So these are the sort of measures that we'll now see in place around the capital. The Met hopes that they'll reassure rather than alarm the public.
I feel more protected with police with guns than just walking with their hands in their pocket, you see what I mean?
I guess safer. I think it might be a little unsettling because it's something we're not used to seeing.
Sad, but that's the world we live in, isn't it?
The latest European attack was the murder of a priest in his church in Rowan. He was killed with a knife in what the intelligence agencies term a low-tech attack. It illustrated the terrorist range of tactics and how their targets might not be in the centre of a major city. In the UK, the increase in armed officers will be concentrated in the big cities, and there's concern that smaller forces are being ignored.
Who would have thought that Rowan in northern France would be under attack in a church? I don't know where the next attack's going to be. Nobody knows where the next attack's going to be. People need to feel safe wherever they live.
So as London police officers took to the river today, the challenge for counter-terrorism chiefs nationally is how they can best protect all corners of the country. June Kelly, BBC News.
The Metropolitan Police Chief Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe has said it's not a question of if, but when another terror attack happens in the UK. So will the deployment of more armed police on the streets of London and other cities make people any safer? Here's our security correspondent Frank Gardner.
Armed police on the streets are just one element in a whole interlocking array of measures aimed at preventing a terrorist attack. The security service, MI5, gathers intelligence on up to 3,000 known terror suspects and their associates. It works closely with GCHQ, the government's listening station in Cheltenham. Their analysts are constantly trying to break into encrypted communications between those plotting attacks. Then there's community policing. Increasingly, the British public have been phoning in tip-offs about suspicious or extremist behaviour. The 600 extra armed officers announced today will help with responding to an attack, but it comes at a cost.
The bigger picture here is these officers are coming from normal patrolling, and that normal patrolling is also the community policing, and it's actually the community policing that's most likely to turn out a terrorist before they get to the point of attacking us.
Bobbies on the beat may sound old-fashioned, but if they disappeared, it could increase the risk of a terror attack. And plans for those terror attacks keep on coming. The national terrorism threat level has been at severe now for the last 2 years, meaning that a terrorist attack is thought highly likely. A total of 50 attacks were foiled between 2005 and 2015. 6 of them were disrupted last year alone. In the 12 months up to March this year, there were 255 terror-related arrests. It was the horrific attack in Mumbai in 2008 that made the government here radically boost police firepower, meeting the threat from determined, well-armed gunmen like the ones who killed over 160 people in 3 days. Last November's multi-pronged attacks in Paris caused a further rethink. If an attack happened here in Britain, say officers, it could happen in several places at once. But despite the current show of force on the streets, officials say there is still no intelligence to indicate that an attack here is imminent. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
The first video has emerged tonight from on board the passenger plane which crash-landed at Dubai airport this morning before bursting into flames. All 300 people on the Emirates Boeing 777 survived, but a firefighter was killed tackling the blaze. Our transport correspondent Richard Westcott reports.
There are people in that plane.
What must it have felt like to be on board this? A normal landing plunged into chaos as the aircraft skids along on its belly. Incredibly, one passenger films the escape. It's not a panic. Some people start getting their luggage down. The plane might have stopped, but these people aren't safe. Realising the danger, one of the cabin crew shouts to get passengers out.
Leave everything, leave the van, jump and slide. We're back later. Jump! Leave your bags behind!
And on the ground, another terrifying sight. Fire. Not long after, this happened. 300 people escaped this wreck. In the calm of the terminal, they say it came without warning.
We have not heard any announcement or anything, but it was a big noise. The smoke was coming inside, so immediately they asked us to evacuate. So we have escaped from the emergency exit. So we were jumping down.
Yeah, all the people were shouting because all the children and women, everybody was there. All the people was shouting, crying.
A firefighter was killed putting out the blaze. The chairman of Emirates says everything seemed fine as the aircraft approached Dubai.
I think because it was very much clear to land at that minute. It just happened before landing or almost at landing time.
Yet the plane didn't seem to have its wheels down when it hit the ground. We don't know if that was a mechanical problem, a mistake by the pilots, or both. Still, it's hard to believe all the passengers walked away from this alive. Richard Westcott, BBC News.
The service sector makes up around 75% of the UK's economy, and today a survey showed there's been a sharp drop in activity in the sector since Britain voted to leave the European Union. Tomorrow the Bank of England meets and a cut in interest rates, the first in 7 years, is on the cards. Our economics editor Kamal Ahmed joins me now. First of all, the survey on the service sector, it's looking at a 4-week period. I mean, could we be looking at a short-term drop or the start of a long-term decline?
I think it's probably a little bit of both. I think first off, this fall is dramatic. It's gone down to the lowest level since 2009, and that was in the teeth of the recession that followed the financial crisis. It's the biggest 1-month drop since records began back in 1996, so it certainly is dramatic. I think there are some short-term factors that have affected the last 4 weeks since the referendum vote. First of all, of course, a lot of businesses, a lot of consumers thought that Britain would vote to remain in the European Union, so there was the surprise of the referendum result. And then secondly, of course, built on top of that was the political turmoil. For a period after the Prime Minister resigned, it wasn't clear who would be the next Prime Minister. Now that, of course, has dissipated. We have a new government in place. Theresa May is the Prime Minister, so confidence and certainty could come back. There is one long-term issue, though, which is important and won't be resolved quickly. That's our relationship with the rest of the European Union, our biggest trading partner. That could take years to settle, so that uncertainty will still remain.
And meanwhile, there's a lot of expectation. We could see an interest rate cut, the first for 7 years tomorrow. How likely is it?
Well, I think it's certainly far more likely than it was in the Monetary Policy Committee meeting last month when they voted 8-1 against raising interest rates. Since then, we have had a lot more data. So the committee has, which makes it the interest rate decision, has a lot more data to go on. Construction, manufacturing, consumer confidence, all quite poor figures over the past 4 weeks. I think there have also been a signal from some big players on the Monetary Policy Committee, the Governor of the Bank of England himself, Andy Haldane, Martin Wheel, that they do think an interest rate cut would be good for the economy. Can Carney persuade the other members of the MPC to do that? I think that is likely, and there will be likely to be a 0.25% interest rate cut from 0.5%, a record low, to 0.25%. Good for mortgage holders, not so good for savers.
Kamal, thank you. The contest to replace Nigel Farage as leader of UKIP has thrown the party into disarray after one of the favourite candidates was excluded from the race. The MEP, Stephen Woolfe, missed the deadline by 17 minutes to submit his papers to run. 3 members of UKIP's executive committee have now resigned in protest amid talk of a coup against him. Our political correspondent Carol Walker reports.
Along the Kent coast, UKIP helped galvanise the tide of support for Brexit.
We've all got our bit to do, haven't we? Hello, how are we? All right.
But what future does it have without Nigel Farage? He stood down after the referendum, saying he'd achieved his political ambition. He leaves a party mired in rows and infighting. The party's immigration spokesman, Stephen Woolfe, would have been the front runner to succeed him, but he's been disqualified for missing the deadline for applications by 17 minutes. Some of his allies have said he's the victim of a coup. 3 others have resigned in protest from the party's ruling national executive, which made the decision.
I would ask them not to resign from the party, but to resolve the issues of radically changing our party and removing the NEC, which was one of the promises I made in my manifesto.
So who are the candidates on the list? Diane James is the best known. She narrowly lost the Eastleigh by-election and is now MEP for South East England. Bill Etheridge is MEP for the West Midlands and a Dudley councillor. Liz Jones is a family law solicitor and a party activist in South London. Jonathan Arnott is MEP for North East England and a former UKIP General Secretary. Lisa Duffy is a Cambridgeshire councillor who has the backing of some senior party figures. Philip Broughton is a semi-professional wrestler who works at his local supermarket.
Nigel Farage may have failed to win this parliamentary seat, but under his leadership, almost 4 million people voted for UKIP at the last election. But what is the party's mission now that Britain is on its way out of the EU? Answering that question is the big challenge for whoever emerges as the new leader. Do you know any of these candidates who are vying to succeed him? No.
Not got a clue.
No.
No, the one down the
This one, Diane James.
Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
No, I don't know any of them.
Do you recognise any of these?
No.
What do you think that UKIP could still do then?
What for the country? See the British people's right for a change, rather than give it away.
Look after us.
Look after their own before they start looking after other countries.
What do you think is the point of UKIP now that Britain's voted to leave the EU, though?
Well, we've got to see it through, haven't they? It's not actually gone through yet, has it? It's another 2 years. It's got to be made to sure that they've chased out and keep it up, to get out.
What do you think is the point of UKIP now?
No point.
In places like this, voters will judge UKIP not just on its new leader, but on whether it can find a new message after the vote to leave the EU. Carol Walker, BBC News, Ramsgate.
The Italian authorities are investigating whether so-called Islamic State is now involved in organising and profiting from the passage of migrants from Libya to Italy. The crossing is becoming more popular as other routes close down, but it's increasingly dangerous. More than 3,000 migrants or refugees have died in the Mediterranean this year alone. Our correspondent Chris Buckler is on a rescue ship operated by the charity MSF out in the Mediterranean tonight. Chris.
I'm standing on the Bourbon Argos, which is in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. This is actually a cargo ship, but it's being transformed into a search and rescue vessel. You can probably see behind me old shipping containers. Inside there is actually a mini hospital, and they're helping refugees and migrants, and thousands already have been picked up by this ship this year. And in fact, we're on the way back from another trip off the North African coast to southern Europe with people who have escaped that deadly crossing. But so many don't, although it's not quite clear how many have died in this ocean this year. Each day the Mediterranean appears, tempting those who see it as a crossing to Europe. But even if they are able to ignore the risks and reality of what that means, others can't. Search and rescue teams have become a fixture on this ocean. Shortly after sunrise, the latest overloaded boat drifts into view, around 20 nautical miles off the coast of Libya. It's so full that people are hanging off the sides, but there's no sign of the smugglers who have made this a business.
We have approximately 25 females, 4 children, 1 pregnant woman.
How far along are you? 8 months.
All 138 people in this boat were aligned on being rescued. They had no supplies, nor any obvious way of reaching Europe. This group are from Gambia, Nigeria, Sudan, and elsewhere in Africa. But some of them have been stuck in Libya for months.
I was afraid. I was really afraid. In Libya, I was put in prison with my children. I had to pay money in order to get out. I put my life and my children's life on the line to come here. In this land, my children can go to school, we can live in peace. What else is there?
There is joy here. These people have found safe passage. But over the last fortnight, a dozen bodies a day have been washing up on the beaches of Libya. Near to the site of this rescue, another boat lay floating in the water, possessions still inside, and no sign of what happened to those who were once in it.
The International Organization for Migration says that already this year, internationally, more than 4,000 refugees and migrants have died. And it's thought around 3/4 of them drowned here in the Mediterranean Sea.
Médecins Sans Frontières, which operates this rescue ship, is now refusing money from European governments because it says their policies are not helping refugees.
I'm ashamed of being a European and seeing how Europe actually is treating these people. We hear numerous times about people getting tortured, girls getting mass raped, people are being sold into slavery. And you see the people back home basically talking about we're bringing the terrorists to Europe.
There have, of course, been attacks that have been linked to refugees. Are you worried then that the governments, the authorities in Europe are actually, if anything, only going to become tougher on how they deal with this problem?
They probably are. Absolutely. Of course, that's worrisome. I'm terrified that it will be tougher because right now, people are suffering. They're suffering a lot.
Some are looking to Europe as a place where they can simply build a better life.
I'm going to Europe to work.
Europe is obviously a place that's a lot of people are going to at the moment.
Yeah.
Do you think it has room for everyone?
You know, I'm a Christian. I believe in Greeks. Everybody is not the same. So I believe my luck will shine.
But the medical staff say it's clear to them that many who have come through Libya have suffered.
The patients that we see, there's some very harrowing tales of abuse that has happened. There's people who have been forcibly imprisoned as well, and they carry many injuries from that.
Whatever they are leaving behind, rescue is a moment of relief. A time to savour, because this journey is only the start. Europe will bring its own challenges. Chris Buckler, BBC News, on the Mediterranean Sea.
A High Court judge has ordered a man in Saudi Arabia to fly his 21-year-old daughter back home to Swansea after she claimed he was holding her there against her will. Amina Al Jeffrey says she's been imprisoned by her father because he objected to her Western lifestyle in the UK. Hal Griffith reports.
Held against her will. This is the photo Amina Al Jeffrey sent to a friend claiming she'd been caged. The 21-year-old says she's been assaulted, denied food and water, even access to a toilet, a prisoner in her father's home. Today, a High Court judge ruled he should allow her to return to the UK.
We're delighted. I mean, I can't tell you. My only concern is that I don't know if Amina even knows that this decision's been made.
In his ruling, Justice Holman said Amina had been severely constricted by her father, who'd admitted locking her in the flat for several hours when he goes out. A yellow grille still in place was a constraint on her communication with the outside world. He stressed she is currently in peril, from which she requires to be rescued. This is Amina's family home in a quiet suburb of Swansea. She went to the local school and is remembered as being confident and outgoing. But according to her father, her life here was toxic, corrupted by drugs and alcohol. He claims he had to take her away in order to save her. There was no one at the house today, but Amina's school friends have told the BBC she wasn't a rebel, just another teenager.
She was a bubbly girl. You know, she never kept herself to herself. She got along with people. I had plenty of mates in school. And yeah, nothing out of the ordinary, just a normal teenage girl.
British courts have no jurisdiction in Saudi Arabia. Amina's father has been supported by the Saudi government, whose laws restrict women's movements. The ruling carries no legal weight there.
I think in some respects it can be seen to be unrealistic. However, at least the judiciary has taken the decision to ensure that that young girl will be brought back to the UK. Whether that's followed through, that's going to be very difficult to monitor and to exercise.
A deadline of September the 11th has been set for Amina's return. The Foreign Office says it will raise the case with the Saudi authorities, but it knows that may fall on deaf ears. Howell Griffith, BBC News, Swansea.
A brief look at some of the day's other news stories now, and a committee of MPs has warned that Britain's border force doesn't have enough boats to patrol the UK's coasts. Currently, only 3 of the 5 border force cutters are patrolling more than 7,000 miles of shoreline. The committee says Royal Navy ships should be made available to fill any gaps. Police in Pakistan have confirmed that a British woman whose husband claimed she'd been the victim of a so-called honour killing was strangled. 28-year-old Samir Shahid from Bradford died last month in northern Punjab. The energy regulator Ofgem is to cap tariffs for prepayment meters in an effort to cut gas and electricity bills for the poorest customers. It's among measures to reduce energy bills and increase competition. More households in England, Scotland and Wales will be encouraged to switch suppliers. The boxer Tyson Fury is to face a UK anti-doping charge over the presence of a banned substance. The British world heavyweight champion was provisionally suspended in June, but that's been lifted until a hearing takes place. He denies the accusation. Andy Murray has been named as Great Britain's flag bearer. He'll lead the British team of 366 competitors at the opening ceremony of the Olympics in 2 days' time. Today, the Olympic torch arrived in Rio after being carried more than 12,000 miles around Brazil. But these games are getting underway after weeks of controversy for the sporting world and a difficult time for the Olympic movement, as our sports editor Dan Rowan reports from Rio.
After a journey across Brazil, this morning's arrival of the Olympic torch in Rio was a symbolic moment. In 2 days' time, it'll be the focal point of the opening ceremony. But the build-up to these games has been a troubled one, dominated by the Russian doping scandal. Under severe pressure, the International Olympic Committee is meeting here this week amid a crisis of faith in its leadership. And Britain's most successful Olympian told me the start of the sport cannot come soon enough.
Let's just keep our fingers crossed. Once the games start, there's going to be some amazing performances across the board from all the countries, not just from GB. Just something that we can all celebrate and remember what the point of the Olympic Games is as well. You know, it's about bringing the world together and celebrating humanity, celebrating sport, and just not focusing on the negative issues all the time.
But are the Games worth the billions they cost? London 2012 helped transform East London and most of the venues are in use, but failed to make Britain a more active nation. The Sochi Winter Games were the most expensive ever and arguably the most damaging given the revelations of state-sponsored doping. And now there's Rio. The setting is hard to beat, but it's struggled with opposition, recession and concerns over Zika, pollution and security.
Well, come here to the Olympic Park and you're struck by the sheer scale of global sports events in the 21st century. For many, they're worth every penny, but for the critics, they question the cost and the legacy of the Olympics. And with more and more countries thinking twice before bidding to stage them, the very future of the Olympic Games could now be at stake.
IOC President Thomas Bach has pledged to reduce the cost of bidding to stage the Games. But some want other values prioritised. Campaigners here in Rio insisting that mega events like this are too often linked to human rights abuses and corruption.
If the IOC and the international federations don't react, if they just continue as they did and say, well, we don't care, then it might be the end of the Olympic Games, at least as games with a value, with a message to the world, what is laid down in the Olympic Charter.
But here in Rio, it's evident that the Games remain big business, with billions of pounds generated in sponsorship and broadcasting revenue each Olympic cycle. And there are some Western cities that still want to play host.
In 2024, I want to win a gold.
Los Angeles, one of those bidding to secure the Games for 2024.
There is sustainability, there is infrastructure. Los Angeles has 97% of our permanent venues are already built. We only have to build one permanent venue. So we have the facilities, we're a sporting town. 88% of our residents in our town want to bring the Games back to the city of Los Angeles.
There are attempts to appeal to younger audiences. 5 new sports, including surfing and skateboarding, today added to the Tokyo 2020 programme. This evening, meanwhile, Brazil took on China in the women's football tournament. Organisers hoping the excitement builds as these games progress and provides the showpiece the Olympic movement now needs. Dan Rowan, BBC News, Rio.
A woman from Monmouthshire who flew to America to have a tumour removed has landed her family with more than £61 million, all because of a lucky feeling. Her surgery went so well that she rang her daughter back home and insisted that she buy a lottery ticket for the family. It's a good job her daughter did what she was told because they hit the jackpot. Sangeeta Maiskar's report contains some flash photography.
For the Davis family, life really can't get any better. They've won £61 million in the Euro lottery in the same week that mum Sonia found out that life-saving surgery on a tumour had been a success.
I just felt like I cheated death in a way. I just feel so lucky. You're just on a roll. Just that's it. We'll buy a lottery ticket because we're so lucky.
Feeling lucky.
You just, you know, I didn't for a moment think we'd win, but you just feel like you are just so lucky that, you know, everything's shining down on you.
It's tears of joy now for daughter Stephanie, but it had taken a long phone call from mum to convince her to go out in the rain to buy the ticket. She finally relented, and boy, what a result.
We ran around the house, locked all the doors and the windows as if everybody outside knew and there was somebody watching her. And then all of a sudden we were suddenly like, well, you know, what if this ticket disappears? So in the crazy moment, we took a few selfies with the ticket, just to prove that, you know, we did have the winning ticket.
So, what's on the shopping list? Well, youngest daughter Courtney, a student now clear of debt, has an idea.
I stupidly said I was going to buy myself an electric toothbrush because I've never had the money to warrant spending £50 on a toothbrush. So that was my first comment and I haven't lived it down yet.
The family have decided to split the winnings equally. That nets them just over £12 million each. And all because that mum managed to get her daughter to listen to her just this once.
Mum's been cured now and we can just move forwards and just enjoy life. And I think the lottery on top of it is just an added bonus. A big added bonus.
And the lesson is always listen to your mum?
Yes, definitely.
The Davises now say they'll sit back and let the good news sink in before deciding how to invest their winnings. Sangeeta Maiska, BBC News, Newport.
Newsnight's about to begin over on BBC Two in a few moments. Here's Emily.
Tonight, just 2 days away from Rio, we ask about our own Olympic legacy. Did 2012 succeed in transforming a generation? We have Dames Kelly Holmes and Tessa Jowell live in the studio. Join me now on BBC Two.
Here on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Good night.